Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Old Man. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with everything with Dan and Zoe. I thought that was such an interesting nightmare he had, like, oh, we have to go get her. I'm assuming, like, he thought, I guess that was supposed to be, like, a young Emily being taken by, Faraz, like, it's like, right, this ghost that was always, this shadow always lingering over, almost like this, hanging guillotine above your head, and always knowing there was always a chance it could come down on you. And I think that's so interesting, a little inverse that they've done, where it's like, right, there's a whole situation where anytime Johnny in the past he's seeing Abby, the older Valor, but then like this time Dan, older Johnny, is seeing a younger Valor, and I'm like, I think that's such a fascinating little inverse that they did there. But I love that whole conversation he had with Zoe where he's like, right, write your real name down, puts on a napkin, puts that in the water and says, like, right. So basically when you do what we do, you have to bury it deep. You kind of have to leave yourself behind. But when it's all said and done, you can kind of like, pick that name up and kind of pick up the pieces. And she's like, I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but that's not fixable. You can't, that's not even recognizable. But then like, oh, that's kind of the point. Like, that's the price you pay for what you do. But he's like, no, that's just kind of the price you pay for waking up in the morning. Just kind of like, we all kind of make this unofficial like agreement that we aren't all just in a constant state of free fall. So I just thought that was such an interesting conversation. That's like, right, when this is all said and done, you can't ever fully piece yourself back together after this. Like, it will latch onto you some shape or form. You can never, even when you try to be the person you were before, it's like it's gonna be wearing a suit that doesn't quite fit anymore. It's kind of like, I think a great analogy to kind of make in this particular regard. And I thought it was interesting, the whole conversation about her wanting to know what he does and how he does it. And so he ends up breaking it down to, like, in one head, you have your empathy. This empathy allows you to see people, allows you to understand people, but it also allows you to recognize their weaknesses, their shame, everything that you could do to, like, manipulate them and get what you want. On the other hand, you have your ruthlessness, the ability to take everything you learn with your empathy and use it against someone and cut them open, dismantle them to get what you want. The ruthlessness, it's like, one hand is like arming yourself with what you need to like use against a person, while the other hand is about having is actually going through and using it. So, and I think that's such a very interesting thing of like, yeah, you can have all this information, but do you have the ruthlessness to actually use it? Because it can be rough to do that. And even Zoe's like, oh, was it easy for you? You're cooking, telling me your stories just to get you to stay. He's like, well, it's not that simple. She's like, it probably is. He's like, honestly, it wasn't that hard. And she's like, right, I want you to teach me about that. I want you to teach me how your world works. And he's like, once you do that, though, like, it's like, kind of like Pandora's box. Once the box is open, there's no, like, closing that again. And I've used that metaphor a lot recently. It's one of those, like, mythological things that's always kind of stuck with me. But it's this situation of, I guess, genie out of a bottle would also be another, like, apt kind of metaphor or antidote to use in that regard. But basically, once you see the world that way, once you see people that way, you can never undo that. There will always be a part of you that's always going to, like, anytime you meet someone going forward, you never know if you can really trust them, because from the beginning you're just like, all right, so how can I use this person? How can I discard them? To be fair, we kind of saw that, like when we were stopped by the police, that part of him immediately clicked in when she saw him. She's like, oh, I see you. And I think that's a combination of his fears with the whole Abby, well, like residuals from the whole Abby situation, especially like in her later years when her memory started slipping, a combination of that and him not wanting another person out there to see him like that. I think a combination of all that. But it's like, yeah, what did he do in that sequence? He ended up killing Zoe. So I think it kind of speaks volumes of like, right, there's a part of your brain that can't all shut off and is automatically thinking like, all right, how can I use this person? And then how can I go about discarding them when they're no longer useful? So that whole situation was fascinating. And it kind of is so applicable in this regard. But it's like, yeah, you'll never be able to trust people because you'll start to assume, hey, if I'm doing this, they're doing the same thing too. So, which is almost interesting because you're like, right. So that means on some level he's wondering if Zoe's doing the same thing. To be fair, she flipped the script on him back in episode 4, so it's not that out of pocket to think about, you know? But I thought that was so fascinating. But it's like, yeah, you'll never be able to trust people again. But for her, it's like, I don't care. Like, you're talking to a lady who already doesn't trust people to begin with. So, like, why start now caring about it? So that, and kind of understanding the that bank account situation of understanding, like, okay, these numbers means that she's okay. The numbers over here being like, what was it, like slanted or something like that, means she's coming to my location. So it's like, hey, I'm sure for him it's like, for one, it's like knowing that his little girl is okay, but also that she's finding a way to him. Also, you get to finally introduce Zoe and Emily to each other, so that's going to be interesting. But obviously, they're going to go meet with Pavlovich. And so that ends up being an interesting thing because now it's like, oh, Zoe being like, yeah, will he recognize you? In a moment, I was like, yeah, I'm sure he won't forget. It's like, well, he is the guy that captured you, but he's also the one that let Pavlovich go all those years ago. And I love that thing of like, oh, what's that knife for? It's like, she sent you. And it's like, but the thing is, she's put you in such a contorted position. I mean, it's like, right, she was working with us behind her husband's back, but she doesn't want her husband to know because obviously you're here right now. So he's like, even you don't know what that knife is for because you are Hamzad's monster and you are the person he trusts most in this world. But it's also, you're also someone that she trusts, and now he's kind of torn between these two people. The person that he started this all for, Hamzad, but also wanting to help Valor because of the complicated situation she's in. And he ultimately lets Pavlovich go. So I thought that was fascinating. And then the moment, I was like, oh, this is going to get awkward. Because you could tell that look on Hamzad's face when he was looking around. You're like, he suspects someone in his camp let Pavlovich go. And none of it fell on Johnny, but it all fell on Balor because I love that whole thing of, he talks about his nightmares about like, right, there's some person he can never see like somewhat behind him and he's too afraid to look. They're speaking in a language that he feels like he knows, but he's forgotten for so long. And he doesn't understand what's being said, but whatever it is, he knows it's everything that he's too afraid to say about himself. I'm like, oh, I love this analogy. And then he's like, usually he wakes up from it in a sweat, but then like he turns to his wife, which last night she wasn't beside me, but he was like, she wonders all the time, but it's just happening. Like, the fact is I'm having this nightmare, I happen to turn, and it's almost like maybe anytime she's ever been out of bed wondering is when she's been off doing her things, and now that Pavlovich happened to leave it, I guess it's like she didn't account for the chances that he'd wake up and that would kind of lead his suspicions, because I'm like, you should have laid that out a little bit better, but I guess no one would have thought he'd immediately jump to Balor, but even he's like, no, Balor wouldn't do that, she knows what that would mean. And just Johnny's kind of nervous because it's like, right, like, he's not sure, but he definitely sure as hell has his suspicions, so they're going to have to do a lot. They probably are going to end up framing someone else. I wonder, the effed up thing is immediately in my mind, I'm like, Faraz's sister, she seems like she might be the apt fall person. Like, they're probably going to, like, once again, Johnny and Balor did a lot of stuff they weren't proud of to kind of, like, get away, and this is probably what really turned Faraz into a monster. Wasn't just everything. It wasn't like, because I thought it was like, oh, maybe like him torturing Pavlovich or something. But it's like, well, Pavlovich did manage to survive because Dan's meeting him present day. So I'm like, so it's like, of course, like Johnny ended up letting him go. But it's like the worry of like, right, my wife, the woman I love, she potentially betrayed me, and that worry and probably that paranoia started kicking in, and they probably did a lot to kind of start covering their tracks, and then ultimately he probably probably beats himself up the most because he still got blindsided by it. Even though he had an eye on it, even though he was kind of concerned, he didn't want to believe it. So maybe he got completely blindsided. But not only Ballor's betrayal, because he had an eye on it, but it makes you wonder in the end which betrayal ended up cutting deeper. Because you think it'd be Ballor, but what if, ironically enough, maybe that's also why he's coming after Johnny now. Like, besides all the other stuff, but it's like Johnny's betrayal cut him the deepest because it's like, right, you were someone that chose to fight by my side because you believed and you did this behind my back with my wife. You know, it's like, I think a lot of that, it's a culmination, I think, of so much, everything between Johnny and Faraz. So, either way, present day, Dan is like, yo, Zoe, just stay here. It's all going to be, if anything gets weird, I'm going to come get you. We're going to go back where we came from. She's like, how would I know? Like, what is define weird? He's like, you know it when you see it. So he goes and sees Pavlovich, and they have that little sit down, that conversation. It's like, oh, you saved my life. It's like, yeah, I'm asking you for something that's pretty reasonable. And it's like, okay. And he tells Dan something that neither him nor Faraz knew about Ballor. It's like, oh, you think I recruited her? He's like, honestly, he's like, she had a very way about her that she can draw you in. I was like, the more and more you hear about Ballor, the more you're like, man, she was like top class at what she did. And maybe that's also where like some of that stuff comes from, of like, I think a combination of having to be who she had to be and doing what she did. And the thing is that it's like, right, you went off and you married her, but it's even then, it's like, even now after all these years, there's pieces to your wife you never knew about. And that's where like the complicated rub of it all comes from, you know? So, finding out that it's like, right, when I was in like school in Moscow, like I thought I was kind of pursuing her, but maybe she has this very like instinct and good nature, this nature about her to kind of draw you in. And it's like, yeah, he was like, part of him wondered, like, yeah, I start to wonder, like, because I fell in love with her. Did she love me too? Or was it just that she found out my father was GRU? And you're like, wow. So now it's like, right, this is something about her neither you or Faraz knew. And you could tell it bothered Dan, because it's like, right, you would think, you know, that there were still pieces of her he wasn't even aware existed, you know? So it wasn't just Faraz that was kind of kept in the dark. She kept stuff even from him too. Like, I think he probably thought like, right, we knew the ugliest parts of each other, but then it's like, right, maybe I didn't even scratch the surface when it came to her. So I thought that was so fascinating. But what really kicked the hornet's nest is like when there was someone in like the foreground of like the shot, because it's like they're in the foreground, but obviously the focus is on Zoe, and you're just like, who is that? It's gonna be someone saying something to her, and then you find out it's Kruger. I was like, oh, and she knows Zoe's real name. I was like, yo, your boy Faraz is nasty. I mean, in the sense of how powerful his reach is. The fact is, he immediately knew he knew that Johnny would make a play like this. It's like, right, you tried to gather allies because you know I'm coming after you. Who's the one powerful person you would go to? He knew you'd go to Pavlovich. So Kruger had already, before Dan and Zoe even got there, Kruger was already there telling Pavlovich, like, yo, if you have any information on Dan, you know. And it's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, I didn't even know what I had to offer. And now I do know, because now I realize, like, oh, because Dan brought up a good point. Hey, if he's coming after me, eventually he's going to come after you too after all these years. And for Pavlovich, it's like, oh, it was maybe somewhere in my mind, but I never thought I'd be in a position that I could be in Faraz's favor. And hey, you literally fell into my lap. How serendipitous. But then Dan didn't let himself get captured, killed some of his people, and was like, and pointed a gun at Pavlovich. He's like, this is the second time I've spared your life. Probably won't be a third, but we'll see how that plays out. And Kruger is offering him everything. And she's like, and I love that breakdown of, hey, I do what my client asks me to. She's like, I don't always like it, but I do it because, yes, it's very, she kind of likes work. It's lucrative, but also she knows if I don't do it, he will find someone else to do it. So it's like, and not just you can retire type of way. She knows what deal this is. Like, now knowing what client she's with, if I don't do a good job, he will kill me and then replace me with someone else. So she's like, but this way, I can at least do some good. And I don't know whether that's her being sincere or whether that's BS. That's the thing. You never can tell who's being sincere in certain regards. And this, I think she was just BSing Zoe. Tell her, like, oh, I can get you out of this safely. It's like, you're not his priority. Dan is. But I'm like, I think he would still hurt Zoe to hurt Dan. That's why I'm like, there are innocent bystanders who are just going to be collateral, and I think Zoe would just be collateral. But before things can even be said, like, they pop off and leave. And it's like, I told you to stay at the bar. It's like, yeah, but his lawyer, Faraz's lawyer, knew my name. And even he's like, wait, she knew your real name? It's like, yeah. Well, I guess you had to go with her. And she's like, yeah, that's what I thought. Because apparently she got her Zoe's real name and what she looked like from the police report. Because once again, all the photos that connect to Dan connect to her. Like the one when he was caught, it's like maybe that was him kind of slipping. Once again, the game has changed so much. There were no cops with body cams weren't something he had to really worry about. And it was something so small and routine that it's just like getting captured on camera like that was kind of like what snowballed some stuff, I mean, that's how Harold and the others kind of caught on to him, so... Speaking of Harold, let's move over to his side of things. He gets a call. He's on the phone with his wife, and she's already hearing. I'm like, yo, Faraz kept to his word because his wife Cheryl's like, I'm hearing basically that you aided and abetted a fugitive spy and that you sent someone after to murder him. I'm like, dude, Faraz kept his word. Like, everything's falling out. I don't know whether that's... Well, because we know Boat showed up, and that's might be where she's getting her information. But I'm like, is that already going through the grapevine? Did Faraz, keep his word and, let everything fall? Well, it's like, how would he know about the assassin getting sent to Dan? So it had to be Boat who said something. His name is Morgan. I figured it was something to end, but last episode or so, I was like, was his name Michael? It's like, no. I think there's a different character named Michael, but Boat, Morgan Boat. So Morgan and Harold talk, and it's like, okay, so it's like, you put a mole in my... He's like, yeah, because he's like, why, it's like, well, the result, he was talking more so about the result. He's like, yeah, but I'm not talking about the result. I want to know what the intent was. It's kind of like, why does it matter? Knowing the intent doesn't change the already result, but it's like, all right, I put her there because he asked me to. So when it's all said and done, he's offering, it's like, right, I could clear your name of all of this. All you have to do is let her take the fall. And he's like, what? It's like, yeah, this would all fall on her. She could go out into the wild and maybe she can recover. You get to come home, cleared your name and everything. But obviously which I think it's an interesting flip to last episode, because him and Emily had that whole conversation, that whole back and forth last episode where he wanted her to give up Dan. But for her, it's like, you're asking me to cut away a part of my limb, and now Boat is asking Harold to make her cut off the other limb instead. Just because it's like, but because I don't think she would be able to live as Angela or Emily. She had to put a lot of, she is both Emily and Angela. Once again, the name is just a name, but for Harold, that's not the case. A name, it cements on who you are, and I think for Angela, she's so caught between the two names and two identities that it's like, no, it isn't that simple for me. It isn't just black or white. It's black and white because I am a combination of both of my fathers and my mother, And so it turns into a conversation of Boat being like, right, tell me where you are. So, this could kind of fall on Angela and you get to come back home. Because the thing is, Angela would be burned. Her identity, she'd be left out in the cold, out in the wild. She can, but I don't think she'd ever be able to live as Emily, too, because that identity would probably get burned in the process. I mean, she can't live as Emily anyway just because of her connection to Dan and stuff. So, she'd have to live as Angela. So, it makes you wonder her life as Emily, like, probably because of everything, she probably never really had much of a life as Emily. Like, being Angela means so much because it gave her an opportunity to have this life. Like, because we still don't know much about her, like, getting older and how much of, like, well, because we know that Emily, on official records, killed herself. So, I guess, like, right, everything associated with Emily died the moment she was kind of reborn as Angela, right? So... But they're on the train, and it's like, he's like, yeah, I'm not interrogate. This isn't an interrogation. She's like, yes, it is. He's like, okay, but it's not like that. You know, he wanted to know, like, is that the only way they communicate? It's like, no, a phone here, the 10th floor of, like, the garage, like, a playground near my neighborhood is how we talk on the phone. Which he was like, right. So all this time, you've only ever been the voice on the other side of the phone. And she took offense to that. She's like, do not diminish what we have. It's like, despite us only being able to talk on the phone, he's still been nothing but a great father to me. That he hasn't been any less of a father to me just because we haven't seen each other face to face. Because the last time they saw each other was fall of 2012. And he's like, wait, what about your mom's funeral? She's like, I didn't go. We both thought it would be too dangerous. That's heartbreaking to know she wasn't even able to go to her own mother's funeral, you know? But I, like, sent everything I wanted to say, he put in a letter on and put it in my mom's casket. And I love this, like, but once again, like, after, like, Harold made that remark of, like, oh, it was just on the phone, you're just a voice on the phone, she was like, he sacrificed so much for me, and I've sacrificed so much for him. But then Harold's like, yeah, but when all that sacrifice is all said and done, what is left? And she's like, clarity. Because he's willing to do anything and throw away anything and everything for me, and I'm willing to do the same for him. And she's like, that's love, you know? And I thought that was like a very beautiful speech. You know, it's really, once again, it's very complicated to have that, like, one father, like, bring that up to you. And so when it's all said and done, you know, they're going to go meet with Dan. But she had already set things in motion because the thing is, because, like, she knew kind of what was what, and I thought she was waiting for Harold to tell her the truth, because she's like, yo, I called up this guy, Romani, he's going to, like, take you back home. He's like, you shouldn't have done that. And it's like, she's like, did you know that, like, on my secret contacts, there are two people, my dad and Henry. Henry texts me anytime he goes, it's like, do you know about that? She's like, and even suggesting, you should probably fix that before, when you do go back home, because it's like, you know, that's such a secret thing that you had no idea. Once again, you got blindsided by that. So, it's like, right, what did they on the 7th, because, like, whatever it was, if someone from the 7th floor had contacted you, you would have told me, unless it was something that scared you away. So who was it he's like, it wasn't someone from the agency, it was Boat. And for her, it's like, wow. Because Boat's the one that set this all in motion. We're talking about her father's father, so it's like, that kind of hit hard, but I think at the same time, she just kind of grows with the punches. Like, what did he offer? He's like, he offered to make this all go away. I could clear my name if I let it all fall on you. And he's like, what did you say? For him, it's like, you are a complication I didn't ask for. The fact of the matter is, you are a criminal, a felon. You are a danger to my family, my career, my life. But despite all of that, he couldn't let her go. He couldn't bring himself to do, because I couldn't even stomach the idea, so I told him to get out of my house. And what does Angela say? He's like, what? No. Like, you can't, like, Faraz Hamzat is a ghost. You won't be able to do this. And he's like, okay, I'm underestimating your father. She's like, yes, again, after she already had to tell you earlier how you were underestimating her father again. But she's like, you get a happy ending, Harold. That's what your story is. She's like, I still don't even know what my situation is going to be. So you have to let me go so I can go figure this out. Because, you know, for her, this was a lesson, you know, because this isn't just about me. This is about so many other people who are more important, who take priority. She's like, because there's so many innocent people who are involved. They take priority. you know? And I think for like Dan in that particular case, it's Zoe. In this particular case with Harold, it's his wife and his grandson. And it's like, and for Angela, like, though that's what my fathers taught me, you know? And so, because she knows this would be the last time her and Harold would probably ever see each other when it's all said and done. And they hug. For her, it's like, yeah, saying goodbye to one of her fathers and kind of almost saying, you know, it's also because it's saying goodbye to Angela and everything associated with it, because she has to cut ties with him. When it's all said, he has to cut ties with her. So that means the same thing when it comes to Cheryl and Henry. And as he's leaving, he bypasses, I believe the character's name is Julian, maybe. But I've never met. He's just like the whole Emily thing. It's like, oh, you've only ever been a voice on the phone. And it wasn't until he happens to see Waters in a car. So like, Waters must know what's what. He knows probably at the very least that Angela's a mole. So he, you know, which is sad because they had their moment together, which is going to be interesting to see where the next episode holds. But then the moment like Harold saw that, he immediately ran upstairs because he knew something was off. Because he probably like saw Julian and thought something was a little like, oh, he probably got this instinct, this feeling. But the moment he saw Waters, he got nervous and ran back up. In that moment, that told Harold two things. One, Bolt was going to this was going to happen regardless of what Harold said. Bolt had already set this in motion, so there's that. But he was probably hoping Harold would be okay with it, but like it was always going to be this, is what he was going to say. To some extent, that was my initial thought. But the point is, Bolt isn't going to just let Angela go. He can't. He can't just let her go out in the wild, leave her out in the cold to kind of recover. It's like, no. He spun that BS because he knew it'd be the only way that that Harold would potentially say okay to it. But once again, everything was laid out. Like, Harold was going to say yes anyway, but it was yes to that promise. That promise was already a lie. Like, they're going to kill Angela. They needed to set it all up so that she takes the fall, so this all disappears. But also, like, she's not going to be able to just be, like, out and about. Like, she's too much of, as he kind of describes her, something that started off, that was born out of love, has now grown malignant. And she needs to be wiped out before she continues to spread, essentially. The malignancy continues to spread, essentially. So now, because even Julian was talking to his buddy being like, yeah, but he's like, I had to tell myself over and over again, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. He's like, but then I started thinking to myself, if I have to convince myself over and over and over again that Boat is fine, then maybe things aren't as fine as I think they are. But the complication is that they need to do this. They need Boat to be fine, because for him it's like, yeah, he's done a lot of work for Boat, but Boat is the man. He's the guy that knows the players. He knows the game so well. The person who can see the chessboard the way he does. You need someone like him in that position, because if it's not him, then who else would it be? So that's why it's kind of like, right, they kind of have to do this for him. They just hope that in the end they don't get fucked over by this. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Especially with that line later on when Dan comes aboard shore and then like Harold gets out of the helicopter. I'm like, yeah. It's so interesting because so far in the show they've only been in the same scene together when they were younger back in the 80s. And now it's like, right, here we are older. This is probably the first time they've been in the same room together in 30 years. Or, you know, because Harold was aware of some of the story, but we don't know if a younger Harold and younger Johnny interacted anymore during that time period. You know, we've only seen them have one scene together, and that was like in episode 2. So for them to be here in like episode 6 is kind of very fascinating. It's like, right, who took her? The old man, which I'll get to that in a second. And I love Harold being like, we're going to go get her back. I'm like, yeah. For them to be joining forces like this is interesting, but also to know that the title of the show is like, hey, they did it. They said but they've also like referred to, like, because haven't they referred to, as just an old man, maybe not specifically the old man. It's just an old man. But I think that's fascinating because I'm like, wait, is that where the title comes from? I mean, I think the title like has double meaning because it's like, hey, Dan's an older man and everything. So like when you hear the old man, you think it's him, but they're actually talking. Maybe the title is more so implying both. I mean, it could be both, but it's like, yeah, like Boat is the old man who sees the entire chessboard, and now it's like, right. They're probably going to end up having to take him out. He's probably going to be the fall guy for all of this. But once again, who's going to take his place? Is it going to be Harold? Is Dan going to be forced to take that position? I don't know. it's definitely going to be interesting to see where this goes. Like I said, the Waters and Angela conversation is going to be interesting because they're going to be face to face and probably going to talk next episode. So he's probably going to be like, yeah, I'm just doing my job because you're a mole and everything, but maybe he'll eventually kind of regret what he's doing. Waters might not survive this, which is sad because like him and Angela kind of like hit it off at least a little bit. You know, he's not as bad, you know, so they that conversation they had at the bar like back at what was it, episode 4? Like, I don't know. We'll see. I do believe the next episode is the season finale, so I'm very fascinated to see how all of this is going to play out. I also think it's really interesting. We probably won't see him until next episode, but it's like it's interesting because we've yet to see present day Faraz Hamzad. We've only just seen him in the past, so I think that's probably going to be a big reveal on like who's playing like when we get to see him present day, like that confrontation is going to be interesting as hell. I wonder, are they going to end up taking like, is that how Bolt is handling this? Is he going to take Angela and hand her over to Faraz because it's like, right, you are the daughter of his wife, so either way, we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.